China just built a $10 billion oil pipeline, and it changes everything. Roughly 80% of China's crude oil imports squeeze through a single narrow waterway called the Strait of Malacca. Every day, more than 23 million barrels of oil pass through it. That is more oil than the entire United States consumes in 24 hours. You heard that right. One strait moves more crude than America burns, and China just built a way to go around it. But to understand why this pipeline exists, you first need to understand the choke point it was designed to bypass and why it terrifies the most powerful people in Beijing, the world's most dangerous bottleneck. Picture a strip of water between Malaysia and Indonesia. At its narrowest point, it is barely 1.5 miles wide. Now imagine funneling a quarter of all global maritime trade through that gap. Every hour, roughly 10 vessels squeeze through oil tankers, container ships, gas carriers, all stacked nose to tail like rush hour traffic on a highway with no exits. This is the Strait of Malacca. And if you are China, it is the single greatest threat to your economy. Here is why. China is the world's largest oil importer. In 2024, it brought in over 11 million barrels of crude every single day. And nearly 80% of that oil had to pass through Malacca. Not some of it, not half of it, almost all of it. Your factories, your military, your cities, all of it running on fuel that must survive a trip through a corridor your rivals could shut down overnight. And it gets worse. Piracy in the strait has surged in recent years, with over 130 incidents reported. The waterway is so shallow in places that the largest supertankers cannot even pass through fully loaded. But the real danger is not pirates or shallow water. The real danger is the United States Navy. In Chinese strategic planning, the U.S. is explicitly identified as a threat to Malacca. In any conflict, particularly over Taiwan, American naval forces could park themselves at the mouth of this strait and cut off China's oil supply with a single order. No shots fired, no missiles launched. Just a blockade. And the world's second largest economy starts bleeding out within weeks. Not slowly, not gradually. The kind of bleeding that shuts down refineries, grounds military jets, and sends energy prices into freefall across an entire continent. If Malacca were blocked tomorrow, nearly half the world's shipping fleet would have to reroute thousands of miles around the Indonesian archipelago. The alternative passages, the Lombok Strait and the Sunda Strait, are narrower, shallower, and nowhere near equipped to handle the overflow. Oil prices would spike, supply chains would collapse. And China, the country most dependent on this single waterway, would be hit the hardest. $3.5 trillion in global trade passes through this strait every year. 2/3 of China's entire maritime trade volume flows through it. You could cripple the world's manufacturing engine without firing a single shot. All you would need is a map and a fleet. So what do you do? If you are sitting in Beijing, staring at a map, watching 80% of your oil supply thread through a choke point, your biggest rival controls what is your move. You do not negotiate your way out. You build your way out. And that is exactly what China did, except the place they chose to build was one of the most unforgiving stretches of terrain on the planet. The $10 billion bet. The idea did not come out of nowhere. It started with a single phrase spoken behind closed doors in 2003. China's leader at the time, Hu Jintao, stood before a Communist Party economic conference and gave a name to the problem. He called it the Malacca Dilemma, and that name changed everything inside Beijing's strategic circles. This was not a trade complaint. This was a national security alarm. Who was telling the room that China's entire economic engine was dangling from a thread, and that thread ran through a strait controlled by foreign navies? If you are running the world's fastest growing economy, and 80% of your oil has to sail past American warships to reach you, that is not a supply chain. That is a hostage situation. And in 2003, China finally decided to do something about it. So Beijing started looking at the map differently, not at sea lanes, at land routes. And one country kept jumping off the page: Myanmar. It sits right on the Indian Ocean. It shares a border with China's Yunnan province. And it offered something no other neighbor could: a shortcut. A way to take oil from the Middle East and Africa, offload it on Myanmar's western coast, and pipe it straight into China without ever touching the Strait of Malacca. Feasibility talks began in 2004. By 2007, China's National Development and Reform Commission approved the project. By 2008, the deal was done a $1.5 billion oil pipeline and a $1 billion natural gas pipeline, running side by side from the Bay of Bengal to the Chinese border. But here is the part most people never hear about. This was not just two pipelines. This was an entire energy corridor. Oil storage facilities on Madey Island, a deep-water port at Kyaukpyu, designed to rival some of the largest in the world, a 650,000 cubic meter water reservoir to support operations, refineries planned in Kunming and Chongqing to process the incoming crude. 6 companies from 4 countries, China, Myanmar, South Korea, and India, all brought in to finance and build the gas pipeline alone. China National Petroleum Corporation, the country's largest energy giant, led the whole operation. This was not an infrastructure project. This was a strategic weapon disguised as one. Beijing was not just building a pipeline, it was building an escape route from the most dangerous choke point on Earth. But there was a problem. Between the Indian Ocean and the Chinese border sat some of the most brutal terrain in all of Asia. And to make this escape route work, they would have to punch a pipeline straight through it. Engineering, the impossible. Here is where this story stops being about politics and starts being about physics, because what China attempted next should not have worked. The route starts on Madey Island, off Myanmar's western coast in the Bay of Bengal. From there, the pipelines run 5.5 kilometers underwater to reach the mainland. Then they cut east straight through 4 states, across some of the most punishing geography on the continent. Dense jungle, river gorges, mountain ranges reaching over 16,000 feet, and the Shan Hills, a maze of steep ridgelines and narrow valleys where the earth itself fights back. Critics inside China said it could not be done. Engineers at Sinopec, one of CNPC's biggest domestic rivals, openly questioned whether laying over 1,000 miles of pressurized pipeline across this terrain was even feasible. One Chinese engineering supervisor working on site reportedly looked at a group of visiting observers and asked a simple question: could the Americans run a pipeline straight up a mountain? They did it anyway. The oil pipeline stretches 479 miles from Kyaukpyu to Kunming. The gas pipeline goes even further, over 1,700 miles, all the way to Guizhou and Guangxi provinces, deep inside China. Both pipelines run in parallel through Myanmar, buried underground, protected by 3 layers of polyethylene coating designed to survive decades of moisture, pressure, and ground movement. And the specifications tell you just how serious this project was. The oil pipeline uses 32-inch diameter steel pipe rated for pressures up to 21,000 pounds per square inch. The gas pipeline is even wider at 40 inches. Both were built to American Petroleum Institute and American Society of Mechanical Engineers standards, the same benchmarks used for the most advanced pipeline systems in the world. But the real engineering story is not in the pipe. It is in what they had to build around it. 4 pumping stations along the Myanmar section alone at Maid Island, Sinkantai, Mandalay, and Haisapa, each one pushing crude oil uphill through mountain passes that would stop most construction projects cold. 1 metering station at Nam Kam, right before the Chinese border. 31 valve rooms along the route, including 7 monitoring stations and 12 check valves designed to isolate any section of the pipeline within minutes if something goes wrong. Then there is the terrain engineering, GIS-based route optimization to thread the pipeline through the least destructive mountain paths. Strain-based design to handle seismic activity because this region sits on active fault lines and the ground moves. Long-span suspension bridges to carry the pipeline over gorges. Tunnels bored straight through mountains where going around was not an option. And watching over all of it, a monitoring network that never sleeps. Distributed optical fiber sensors running along the entire pipeline, detecting vibration, pressure changes, and third-party interference in real time. Drones flying regular surveillance routes over the most vulnerable sections, submarine crossings, mountain slopes, cliff faces, and areas prone to landslides. 24-hour monitoring from a centralized control system built by Schneider Electric. They did not just build a pipeline, they built a nervous system. Construction was interrupted multiple times by local protests, armed conflicts in Shan State, and logistics nightmares that come with moving heavy equipment through jungle with no roads. But by July 2013, the gas pipeline went live. The oil pipeline was completed in August 2014. Over a decade of planning, thousands of workers, billions of dollars, and 771 kilometers of steel buried under mountains and jungle, connecting the Indian Ocean to the heart of China. But building it was never the hard part. The hard part was proving it was worth it. Because the numbers that came next told a story that no one in Beijing expected: rewriting the energy map. To understand what this pipeline actually changed, you need to forget everything you know about how oil moves, because the old route into southwestern China was not just slow, it was absurd. Before 2013, if you were a barrel of crude oil from the Middle East, headed for China's southwestern provinces, your journey looked like this. You sailed west through the Strait of Hormuz, down through the Indian Ocean. Then you squeezed through the Strait of Malacca, up through the South China Sea. You docked at a port on China's southeastern coast. And then, after all of that, you still had to be shipped or piped hundreds of miles inland to reach the refineries in Yunnan. The trip from Iran alone covered roughly 6,000 miles by sea, weeks in transit, millions in shipping costs, and every single mile exposed to pirates, blockades, and foreign navies. Now, picture the alternative. A tanker from the Middle East sails into the Bay of Bengal. It docks at Kyaukpyu, on Myanmar's western coast. Crude oil flows off the ship, into storage tanks on Made Island, and straight into a buried pipeline. Within days, that oil is sitting in a refinery in Kunming, the capital of Yunnan province. No Malacca, no South China Sea, no southeastern coast. Just a direct overland shot from the Indian Ocean to the Chinese interior. That is not a minor shortcut. That is a completely different map. The numbers back it up. The oil pipeline was designed to carry 22 million tons of crude per year, roughly 442,000 barrels a day. The gas pipeline delivers up to 12 billion cubic meters of natural gas annually. By 2022, the system had already moved over 50 million tons of crude oil into China, and it was still ramping up. But here is what most people miss. Before this pipeline existed, 3 entire Chinese provinces, Yunnan, Guizhou, and Guangxi, had zero natural gas pipeline access. None. They depended on liquefied natural gas trucked in from Sichuan. The Myanmar pipeline changed that overnight. Residential gas prices in the region dropped by an estimated 13%. Industrial capacity in Guangxi was projected to explode. Millions of people gained access to cheaper, cleaner energy for the first time. And this was not China's only move. The Myanmar corridor joined 3 other overland oil import routes from Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Russia. 4 land-based energy arteries, now feeding China from 4 different directions, each one a hedge against Malacca, each one a strand in a web that did not exist 20 years ago. The math is straightforward. China imports over 550 million tons of oil a year. Roughly 78% of that used to transit through Malacca. The Kyaukpyu port, at full capacity, could handle 60 million tons shaving, approximately 14% off China's Malacca dependence. That does not sound like a revolution. But in geopolitics, 14% is the difference between a chokehold and a survivable squeeze. But China was not just trying to survive a squeeze. It was building something much bigger, a system designed to make the old rules of global energy obsolete. The bigger game. If you think this is just about one pipeline, you are missing the point entirely. The Myanmar corridor is not a standalone project. It is a piece in one of the largest strategic puzzles ever assembled. And once you see the full picture, you start to realize that China is not just diversifying its oil routes, it is building a parallel energy system, one that operates entirely outside the reach of any navy on Earth. Start with the Belt and Road Initiative. The Myanmar pipeline is officially part of it. In 2017, Myanmar's civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi traveled to Beijing and signed on to China's Silk Road Economic Corridor framework. That signature unlocked something far bigger than an oil pipeline. It opened the door to the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, a sprawling infrastructure network stretching from Kunming all the way to Kyaukpyu, encompassing plans for a high-speed railway, a special economic zone, and a deep water port originally designed with container capacity rivaling Valencia and Manila. We are talking 5 to 7 million container units a year. That is not an energy project. That is a full-spectrum trade corridor connecting China's interior directly to the Indian Ocean. Now zoom out further. Kazakhstan has been pumping oil into China through an overland pipeline since 2006. Turkmenistan feeds natural gas into China through Central Asia. Russia's pipelines push crude and gas across the northern border. And then there is Pakistan. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor connects the port of Gwadar on the Arabian Sea straight to China's Xinjiang region, offering yet another route that skips Malacca entirely. Do you see what is happening? Each one of these corridors, on its own, looks like a regional infrastructure deal, but put them together and the picture changes completely. You are looking at a continental energy grid, an overland network that can receive oil and gas from the Middle East, Africa, Central Asia, and Russia, all without a single tanker passing through a single choke point. No other country on Earth has built anything like this. And that is precisely the point. In Chinese strategic thinking, the US is not just a competitor. It is the country that could shut off China's oil supply in a crisis. Every war game, every scenario involving Taiwan or the South China Sea includes one move: an American blockade of the Strait of Malacca. For decades, that was a checkmate threat. You block Malacca, you starve China of energy, and the war is over before it starts. The Myanmar pipeline does not eliminate that threat, but it weakens it significantly. Every barrel of oil that flows through Kyaukpyu instead of Malacca is a barrel that a naval blockade cannot touch. Every cubic meter of gas piped through Myanmar is leverage that Washington loses. And when you stack Myanmar on top of Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Russia, and Pakistan, the blockade stops being a kill shot. It becomes a wound. A serious wound, yes, but not a fatal one. That shift changes the calculus for every military planner in the Pacific. But before you assume China has solved its problem, there is something you need to know. Because this pipeline, for all its ambition, came with a set of problems that almost no one talks about. The cracks in the plan. The Myanmar pipeline is an engineering marvel. It is a geopolitical masterstroke, but it is not bulletproof. And if you are going to understand why this project still changes everything, you first need to see where it falls short. Start with the numbers. The oil pipeline can move 22 million tons of crude a year at full capacity. That sounds enormous. But China imports over 550 million tons annually. That means even if this pipeline runs at maximum output every single day, it covers roughly 4% of China's total oil imports. 4%. Not 40. Not 14. 4. One pipeline was never going to replace an ocean. And for years, it did not even come close to full capacity. The gas pipeline went live in 2013, but by 2018, it was moving just 3.2 billion cubic meters, barely a quarter of its 12 billion cubic meter capacity. The oil pipeline was finished in 2014, but sat idle for 3 years. Myanmar demanded lower transit fees. China pushed back. The crude did not start flowing until 2017. 3 years of a completed pipeline sitting empty, not because of engineering failure, but because two governments could not agree on the price of moving oil through it. Then came the most devastating blow of all. In February 2021, Myanmar's military seized power in a coup. Overnight, the country descended into civil war. And the pipeline, stretching across 4 states, through territories controlled by armed ethnic groups, resistance forces, and a military junta, became a bargaining chip for everyone with a gun. Resistance fighters threatened the pipeline to pressure China into withdrawing support from the junta. The junta used its protection of the pipeline as leverage to extract diplomatic backing from Beijing. Leaked documents revealed Chinese diplomats pressing Myanmar's military leaders behind closed doors, demanding security guarantees. At least 2 Myanmar officials were arrested after those documents went public. The pipeline did not just become infrastructure caught in a war zone. It became the war zone. And the financial picture was not much better. The combined project cost ballooned to roughly $5 billion. Maintenance across jungle and mountain terrain is unpredictable and expensive. Landslides do not send invoices in advance. Seismic shifts do not wait for budget cycles. Transit fees to Myanmar eat into returns. And with China's domestic energy prices controlled by the government, the gap between what CNPC pays to move oil and what it earns selling it has raised serious questions about whether this pipeline will ever make commercial sense. By some estimates, strategy has been subsidizing the bottom line since day one. French geopolitical analyst Philippe Sebilla-Lopez put it bluntly: even if every pipeline China has planned across Southeast Asia comes online, the country will still need a powerful navy and deep regional influence to truly escape its dependence on Malacca. So after all that the billions spent, the mountains conquered, the politics navigated, did this pipeline actually change anything? The new map, yes. And here is why. The pipeline was never designed to replace the Strait of Malacca. It was designed to make a blockade survivable. And that distinction matters more than most people realize. Think about it this way. Before this pipeline existed, if the United States Navy parked a carrier group at the mouth of Malacca, China's southwestern provinces went dark. No crude for the refineries in Kunming, no gas for the factories in Guangxi, no fuel for millions of people in Yunnan. The blockade did not need to stop every barrel. It just needed to stop enough to break the system. And with 80% of China's oil funneling through one strait, enough was almost everything. Now, the math is different. Kyaukpyu is open. Crude flows overland. 442,000 barrels a day bypass the choke point entirely. The refineries keep running. The lights stay on. Not at full capacity, but they stay on. And in a crisis, the difference between blackout and survival is the difference between surrender and negotiation. But the pipeline did something else that almost nobody talks about. It proved the concept. Before Myanmar, no one had ever pushed a pressurized oil and gas pipeline across terrain this extreme at this scale. Mountains, over 16,000 feet. Active seismic zones. Dense jungle with no roads. Everyone said it could not be done. China did it anyway. And that proof of concept now applies to every overland energy corridor Beijing is building or expanding. Central Asia, Russia, Pakistan. The blueprint exists, the engineering works, the template is proven. Now stack it all together. The Kazakhstan pipeline operational since 2006, Turkmenistan, gas flowing through Central Asia, Russian crude and gas crossing the northern border. The Myanmar corridor pumping oil from the Indian Ocean. The China-Pakistan economic corridor connecting Gwadar to Xinjiang. What you are looking at is not 5 separate infrastructure projects. It is a continental energy grid, an interlocking network of overland pipelines that can receive fuel from every major producing region on Earth, the Middle East, Africa, Central Asia, Russia, without a single tanker passing through a single choke point. 20 years ago, one blockade could have brought China to its knees. Today, you would have to shut down 5 countries, 4 mountain ranges, and 3 continents to achieve the same result. That is what $10 billion bought. The next time someone tells you that global energy runs through the ocean, remember this: 771 kilometers of steel, buried under mountains and jungle, running from the Bay of Bengal to the heart of China. That is not just a pipeline, that is a new map. And the old one is never coming back.